My name is Dr. Sela Marsh. I hold a tenured position in the ecology department at Briar Falls University, where I have been a faculty member for 11 years. My research specialty is acoustic ecology, the scientific study of soundscapes, which are the total sonic environments of given geographic locations, analyzed not as noise or music or nuisance, but as ecological records. The way a forest sounds at 2 in the morning in October tells you things about that forest that visual surveys and soil samples cannot. It tells you which species are present and in what abundance. It tells you where they are in relation to each other and in relation to human encroachment. It tells you, if you are trained to listen correctly, what has changed and what has remained the same across years or decades of environmental time. I have been listening to forests for 20 years. Forests in 6 states, 2 provinces of Canada, and 1 research collaboration in northern Portugal. I have accumulated more than 40,000 hours of raw acoustic field recording in that time, and I have reviewed every one of them. I am not a person who hears what she wants to hear. I am a person who hears what is there. People who know my work know this about me. It is, professionally speaking, my defining characteristic. I want to establish that clearly before I tell you what happened last September. Because what I am going to describe will invite the precise kind of skepticism that I myself apply to anomalous findings in research contexts. And I want you to understand that I have already applied that skepticism to my own account. I have sat with these recordings for months. I have run every available analytical procedure on the data. I have consulted 2 colleagues, one in acoustic engineering, one in electromagnetic wave propagation, without revealing the specific context, describing only the technical parameters of what I found. Both told me my methodology was sound. Both told me the anomaly I detected was real. What the anomaly means is something I have not yet concluded. What the anomaly is, on a purely physical and evidential level, I can describe precisely. That is what I am going to do now. In early August of last year, I submitted an application to the United States Forest Service for a research access permit to use Whitmore Sector Station 7 as a base of operations for a 6-week acoustic field study. The study's purpose was to document the nocturnal soundscape of the Whitmore Creek Canyon system, a high-elevation watershed in the northern reaches of the district, relatively undisturbed by development, with a species composition that had not been formally surveyed since the mid-1990s. My specific interest was in the canyon's acoustic geometry, the way its orientation, depth, and surrounding topography might create unusual propagation conditions for biological sound, amplifying certain frequencies and suppressing others in ways that could affect animal behavior and communication across the ecosystem. The station had been decommissioned in 2019, part of a budget consolidation that pulled permanent staffing from a dozen remote posts across the region. The building itself remained structurally sound and was maintained under a passive care agreement with a facilities contractor named Dwight Rao, who visited once monthly to inspect the structure, clear debris from the access road, and confirm that the solar panels and emergency water tank were functional. The station was not in use for any operational purpose. It was, essentially, a maintained empty building at 7,400 feet, with a desk and a bunk and running water from a holding tank, sitting at the edge of a canyon that dropped sharply to the west. The permit was approved in mid-August. The conditions were standard: no open flame, no wildlife disturbance, adherence to all posted protocols, a check-in with the regional dispatch office via satellite phone every 48 hours. I was given a lockbox combination for the key. I was told that Dwight Rao would conduct his monthly visit sometime during my 3rd week and would require brief interior access. That was the extent of the orientation I received. I arrived at the station on the 14th of September, a Saturday, in the middle of the afternoon. The drive-in from Route 9 follows a gravel access road that climbs steadily for 57 minutes through 3 elevation bands. First, a dense lower forest of Douglas fir and western larch. Then a transitional zone where the canopy opens and the understory thickens with mountain shrubs and snowberry. And finally the high elevation plateau, where the forest becomes spare and the trees grow shorter and further apart in the thin soil. The station appears without much warning. You come around a long curve in the road and suddenly the trees part and there it is. A single-story building with a covered porch facing east, a small equipment shed to the north, and behind it, rising above the roofline, a decommissioned communication tower in faded orange paint. Beyond the station, the land drops away to the west in the canyon, and in clear weather, you can see across 60 miles of mountain terrain from the porch. On the afternoon I arrived, it was clear. I carried my equipment in across 2 trips from my truck. The setup took most of the remaining daylight: 4 acoustic monitoring units, a laptop with portable hard drive array, a solar charging kit to supplement the station's solar system, 3 weeks of food and water, a satellite phone, a personal field kit, and a research binder I had been compiling for 6 months. I positioned my primary monitoring unit on the porch, oriented toward the canyon to the west, and placed the 3 secondary units at pre-selected points along the canyon rim, 2 to the south, 1 to the northeast, each roughly 300 to 400 meters from the station, connected to the recording system by cable runs I secured to the ground with landscaping stakes. The cable runs were the most time-consuming part. By the time I had them laid and tested, the sky was going dark and I cooked a simple meal on a camp stove in the station's small kitchen. The calibration check that first evening confirmed clean signals across all 4 units. The ambient baseline was good moderate wind interference from the northwest that I noted as a variable to control for light insect stridulation consistent with late-season activity, and from the canyon below, intermittently, the sound of moving water in the creek. I ran a test recording from sundown to midnight and reviewed the output before sleeping. It was clean. It was what I had expected. I went to sleep in the station's back room on the narrow bunk, with the data sorted and labeled on the hard drive and the sensation, familiar from other remote field studies, of being exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. In the morning I found the station's operations binder. I am somewhat embarrassed to admit that I had not looked at it on my arrival day. It was sitting on the shelf above the front desk in plain sight, a thick 3-ring binder in a green cover with a United States Forest Service label on the spine and the station designation printed beneath it. WS7. I had assumed it was standard building documentation, fire safety protocols, emergency contact numbers, equipment maintenance logs. I opened it in the morning with my coffee with the specific intention of locating the emergency contact section and adding the relevant numbers to my satellite phone's directory. And I read through it in the way a person reads institutional documentation when they are looking for something specific, skimming the sections that do not apply, pausing at sections that might. The binder contained 48 pages of documentation: fire evacuation plan, building maintenance log, wildlife encounter protocol, emergency equipment inventory, communication infrastructure schematic for the tower, now marked inactive throughout, and, on page 41, filed behind a section divider labeled Communications Protocols in black capital letters, a single-page document that I read twice before I continued. It was a Standing Operations Amendment, official USFS letterhead, dated March 1992. The text was formatted as a directive in the precise, clipped language of institutional procedure. Whitmore Sector Station 7 Standing Operations Amendment, 7C. Effective immediately and until further notice, all radio communication at this station is to be suspended between the hours of 20 and 6 local time. This applies to all frequencies and all radio equipment installed in or operated from this station. Radio equipment should be powered down at or before 1945 local time. During blackout hours, emergency communication is to be routed through the regional dispatch landline only. Satellite communication equipment is not subject to this amendment. Non-compliance with this schedule is to be reported to the district supervisor within 24 hours. This amendment supersedes all previous guidance on radio operations at this station. Authorized: District Supervisor A. Calloway, Whitmore District. Reference: ARC 1987 WS 044. No explanation, no stated rationale. No reference to wildlife disturbance, frequency interference, equipment maintenance, atmospheric conditions, or any of the practical operational reasons that might legitimately produce such a directive. Just the rule, the authorization, and a reference code that linked to nothing else in the binder. I wrote the code in my field notebook, ARC1987WS044. I don't know precisely why not alarm, not intuition, just the researcher's reflex to preserve reference information that has no immediately obvious context. A code that references something means the something exists somewhere. I also noted, and this is something I have thought about many times since, that the amendment said nothing about why, not even the vague, face-saving language bureaucracies use when they want to convey seriousness without specificity. Phrases like, for safety considerations, or pending investigation, or at the discretion of the district supervisor. It simply said, no radios after dark, as if the reason was self-evident to anyone who needed to know it, as if the reason was the kind of thing you did not put in writing. I set it aside and got on with my work. The first week of the study proceeded well. Each night I ran recordings from sundown to approximately 2, reviewed the previous night's data each morning, and spent the afternoons doing perimeter checks of the monitoring units and updating my field notes. The soundscape was rich and varied in ways that confirmed my expectation that the canyon's geometry was doing interesting things to the acoustic environment. On the second night, I recorded elk movement along the canyon's upper rim, identifiable by the specific tread pattern and the occasional low contact call between animals moving in loose formation. On the third night, I detected the hunting behavior of a northern pygmy owl, a species I had not expected at this elevation, and which required me to revise a section of my preliminary survey notes. On the fifth night, I logged an unusual concentration of cricket stridulation on the eastern monitoring unit that suggested a microhabitat warm spot, probably related to exposed rock formation retaining daytime heat. I was engaged. I was productive. The work was going well. And I was aware, in the way that researchers become aware of things that sit at the edge of their attention, that each night after sundown, a particular quietness settled over the station, not the quietness of a quiet place, but something I struggled to name, something that felt like expectation. I did not record that observation in my field notes. I dismissed it, as I have learned to dismiss observations that cannot be operationalized into data. The anomaly appeared on the fifth night. I nearly missed it. I was doing my morning review of the overnight files from September 19th, running the recordings at accelerated playback, a technique where you listen at roughly twice normal speed to cover hours of recording in half the time, a method I have used for more than a decade. It requires a particular kind of sustained partial attention, the way driving a familiar route requires you to be present without being fully absorbed. You hear anomalies, not because you are listening for them specifically, but because your trained ear flags the out of place in the same way a proofreader's eye catches a misspelled word. What I flagged was in the subaudible channel of the porch unit's recording. This channel monitors frequencies below the standard acoustic range below 20 Hz and is included in my equipment package, primarily to detect infrasound produced by certain large mammals and by geological events. It is not a channel I typically find much in during a standard forest study. On the night of September 19th, at 22:17 by the recording timestamp, it registered a tone, not a sound in the usual sense. A tone, sustained, periodic, sitting at approximately 40 to 60 Hz at its peak, with a quality I recognized from previous work as borderline subaudible at that frequency range. In a quiet environment, a healthy human ear can sometimes perceive sound, not as hearing but as a kind of physical presence, a vibration felt in the chest and sinuses more than processed through the cochlea. The tone was present in the recording for 14 minutes and 23 seconds, from 22:17 to 22:31. It was not continuous across that period it pulsed. At intervals I initially estimated at between 8 and 12 seconds, with variations in the pulse duration that I read as natural signal interference. The kind of modulation you get when a signal travels through terrain and bounces off multiple surfaces before reaching the receiver. I ran the equipment check. The porch unit was functioning within all normal parameters. The power supply was clean. I checked for ground loop interference, an artifact of improperly grounded systems that can produce low-frequency ghost signals, and found nothing. My system is well grounded. I have used it continuously for 4 years in the field, and I know its artifact signature intimately. This was not an artifact I recognized. I extracted the anomalous segment and opened it in my analysis software. When I visualized it on the spectrogram, the graphical representation of sound as frequency against time, which shows you the structure of a signal in ways the ear alone cannot resolve, what I saw was not random interference. Random interference produces a smear across the spectrogram, a diffuse cloud of energy with no internal structure. What I saw was organized. The pulses had internal pattern. Their variations in duration were not random. They were distributed in a way that repeated across the 14-minute segment, not mechanically but with the slight organic inconsistency that characterizes something generated by a system with its own dynamics. The way biological signals are structured. The way whale song is structured on a spectrogram, or certain complex insect calls, or the prosodic rhythm of a language you don't speak but can still recognize as language. I labeled the segment Anomalous Origin Unknown and included it in my field notes with a plan to monitor subsequent nights for recurrence. I did not allow myself to conclude anything further. I was a scientist in a remote location with unusual equipment readings, and the responsible procedure was to gather more data before interpreting the data I had. The tone recurred the following night, and the night after that. By September 22nd, I had 3 separate recordings of the phenomenon, each occurring in the same approximate window between 22 and 23, each exhibiting the same structured pulse pattern, each strongest on the porch unit and progressively weaker on the 3 remote units. I had enough data now to do what I had been avoiding. I ran an enhancement filter to shift the signal into the standard audible range and slowed the playback to 1/4 speed. What I heard was not clear in the way that a voice message is clear, or the way a radio broadcast is clear. It was muddy and layered, the way a conversation sounds when you are standing outside a closed door in a large building and the door is thick and there are competing sounds on your side. There was rhythm. There was intonation, the rising and falling cadence of a sentence's progression. And in the middle of the segment, in a portion of approximately 3 seconds duration, there was a pattern that my ear, despite every instruction I gave it about pattern recognition bias and the human tendency to hear familiar forms in ambiguous data organized into a name. My name. I played it back 4 times, the same 3 seconds, 4 times. The pattern was consistent across all 4 playbacks. I am an acoustic scientist. I have spent 20 years training my ear to hear precisely, to resist the imposition of meaning onto ambiguous signals. And in those 3 seconds, 4 times in a row, I heard the syllabic structure and the intonation contour of my own name. I sat for a long time at the desk with the headphones on and the playback paused. What I felt in that moment was not fear in the theatrical sense. It was not the fear of something reaching for me. It was the specific, cold discomfort of a researcher who has found a data point that doesn't fit the data set. In my experience, data points that don't fit are not errors to be discarded, they are signals to be pursued. They are the things that matter. But they require the correct analytical framework, and what I had at that moment was a hypothesis with no mechanism. I wrote in my field notes, enhancement of 9/22 pulse segment, possible anthropogenic signal, structured modulation consistent with speech pattern at enhanced resolution, origin unknown. Possible atmospheric ducting artifact check for nearby broadcast infrastructure. Cross-reference. ARC 1987, WS044. I had not thought about the amendment in 5 days, but the code surfaced now from wherever I had filed it, brought up by the shape of what I was experiencing, something that broadcast from an unknown source, on a frequency my equipment wasn't designed to detect. After dark. That afternoon, I called the Regional Forest Service office on my satellite phone. A woman named Pat Gillespie in the administration office answered. I asked her to pull the station file, and tell me what she knew about Standing Operations Amendment 7C and the reference code at the bottom of it. She was quiet for a moment while she accessed the file, and then she confirmed that the amendment was on record, that she had seen it when processing my permit, and that she had flagged it internally as legacy documentation, non-applicable given the station's decommissioned status and the removal of all radio equipment in 2019. She said this with the tone of someone reassuring me that an old "no swimming" sign on a drained pool was not relevant to my visit. I asked about ARC 1987WS044. She was quiet again, longer this time. She said she'd have to look into it and call me back. She called back the following morning. ARC 1987WS044 appeared in the regional database as a case file opened in the Whitmore district in 1987. The file itself was not in the digital system. It had been designated a physical-only document, meaning it existed solely on paper in an archival storage facility and had not been included in the digitization program that had processed most of the regional records in the early 2010s. She gave me the archive facility's contact information. She said she'd submitted a retrieval request, but paper retrieval under the current staffing constraints typically took 4 to 6 weeks. I thanked her and put the satellite phone down and looked at the wall for a while. 4 to 6 weeks. I had 4 weeks remaining on my permit. I spent the rest of that morning examining the station building more carefully than I had before, not out of fear, out of method. When a signal has no identifiable external source, you check for an internal one. I went through the building room by room, the main office, the kitchen, the back sleeping room, the supply closet, the bathroom with its holding tank connection. I checked the junction boxes. I checked the underside of the communication schematic in the binder to see if there was equipment I hadn't noticed. I found nothing I hadn't already catalogued. The supply closet had a floor panel. I knew it was there. I had opened it on my first day to check the cleaning supplies and found a folded emergency blanket and a stack of old equipment catalogs from the 1990s on the shelf inside. I opened it again, this time with a flashlight, and looked at the crawl space beneath. The space was approximately 18 inches high, dry, with old pipes and insulation batting. At the far corner, partially obscured by a section of batting that had fallen from the floor above, was a box. It was a government-issue filing box, dark green, approximately 14 inches square, sealed with desiccant tape that had dried and cracked with age. I retrieved it carefully. The label had been partially dissolved by moisture over the years, but the printed text beneath the staining was still legible. Whitmore Acoustic Survey Field Documentation Archive, Station 7. I brought it to the desk and opened it. The box contained a single-bound research report. Its cover page identified it as Whitmore Creek Acoustic Propagation Study Preliminary Findings, September 1987. The authorship listed 3 individuals, a Dr. N. Whitmore, project lead, a researcher named C. Fairless, listed as junior researcher, and a third party listed as B. Tate, signal infrastructure. The document was a research report on acoustic sound propagation through the canyon system, the mapping of how sound moved through the terrain at different elevations, different times of day, different seasons. It was, in its central purpose, almost exactly the study I was there to conduct, 37 years later. I sat on the supply closet floor and read for 2 hours. The report was professionally written and thorough. For the first 40 pages, it was unremarkable, the procedural foundation of a competent field study. Data tables, equipment inventories, weather condition logs. The writing was clear and technical and entirely without distinguishing features. In Appendix C, I found what I had not known I was looking for. The appendix was titled Autonomous Reference Broadcast Unit Installation and Calibration Notes. It described a device that I had not previously encountered in the literature. A unit designed to emit a calibrated reference tone on a specific radio frequency, 162.475 MHz, to allow the study's distributed monitoring stations to synchronize their sensors against a consistent, known acoustic source. The unit was solar-powered and designed to operate continuously without human intervention over the duration of the study. It required no maintenance access once installed. It had been placed at a fixed point in the study area, identified in the appendix by a compass bearing and distance from the station, bearing 247 degrees magnetic, 1.24 kilometers. The installation date was listed as the 4th of September, 1987. The appendix's final paragraph, decommissioning of the ARBU, is scheduled for the 31st of October 1987, following conclusion of the study period. Removal will be conducted by B. Tate. Frequency reallocation to follow standard procedure. There was no decommissioning report in the box. There was no documentation of the October 31 removal. The report was labeled preliminary throughout. It was a draft submitted before the study was formally concluded, and the complete final version was not in the box. The box contained only this: the incomplete preliminary report, its appendices, and the accumulated dust of 37 years. Inside the back cover of the report, in pencil, in handwriting different from any of the document's main text, were 2 lines. The handwriting was careful and small, the kind of handwriting a person uses when they are writing something they want to preserve but do not necessarily want anyone else to find. Do not respond on 162.475 after dark. The unit is still logging. I remained seated on the floor of the supply closet for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and checked the technical specifications of my monitoring equipment. My equipment operates in the acoustic frequency range, pressure waves, air displacement, the physical medium of sound. It does not receive radio signals. Radio operates in the megahertz range, orders of magnitude higher than acoustic frequencies. A standard acoustic recorder cannot intercept a radio broadcast. The 2 domains are distinct. But electromagnetic radiation at sufficient field strength can induce artifact signals in sensitive analog circuits, particularly when the receiving equipment lacks shielding designed for the specific frequency in question. My equipment is shielded against the EMI frequencies, common in North American field research power line frequencies, cellular communication bands, common agricultural radio equipment. It is not specifically shielded against 162.475 MHz, which falls in the NOAA weather radio band, a frequency unused by any broadcast infrastructure in this remote, high-elevation area. If something in the immediate environment was broadcasting on 162.475 MHz at sufficient power, my subaudible monitoring channel, the channel with the most sensitive and least shielded analog circuitry in my system, would register it as electromagnetic interference, not as a clean radio signal, as a modulated artifact, structured, pulsing, partially interpretable if enhanced, strongest at the closest monitoring unit, weakest at the farthest. Exactly as I had observed. I did not sleep that night. Not in an emotional sense. I was not keeping watch, was not afraid in any way I could name cleanly. I was working. I pulled every night's recording and ran enhancement filters across the subaudible channels of all 4 monitoring units, looking for the pulse across the full 9-day record. I found it in all 4 units beginning on the night of September 15th, my second night at the station. I had missed it on those first nights because I had not yet been examining the subaudible channel closely. The anomaly had been present from nearly the beginning. The signal strength differential across the 4 units was consistent across all 9 nights. I ran the triangulation using standard signal propagation calculations, accounting for the terrain between the source and each receiver. The source was not inside the station building. The source was west-southwest of the station, at a distance of approximately 1.1 to 1.3 kilometers. At bearing 247 degrees magnetic, I stood in the station's doorway in the dark with my compass. The needle settled. I aligned my body. I looked into the forest to the west-southwest. The trees were dense. There was no light in that direction beyond the stars visible above the canopy. There was no sound from that bearing beyond the ordinary sounds of the high-elevation night. Wind in the upper branches, the creek somewhere far below, an elk moving through brush on the canyon's opposite rim, a moth against the porch light. I knew what was out there. I had known for 2 hours. A device installed in September 1987, designed to broadcast through October of that year, never retrieved. Solar-powered and solar technology in 1987 was already reliable enough for long-term autonomous operation, particularly at high elevation, where UV incidence was high and panel degradation was slow. 37 years of sustained power from a panel facing south on a clearing in a high-elevation forest with 300 days of sun per year was, while unusual, not technically impossible. The appendix said the ABU had been designed as a broadcast device. It emitted, it did not receive. A broadcast-only device recording its acoustic environment, which is what the handwritten note implied, would require a modification to its original design. The report listed B. Tate as responsible for the installation and noted that several standard parameters had been adjusted for site conditions without specifying what those adjustments were. I went back to the binder's visitor log, which I had reviewed on my first day and noted only for Dwight Rao's September entry. I pulled it now and read every entry from the beginning. The log ran from 2017 to the present, 43 entries. Most were brief and routine. Caretaker visits, an occasional overnight ranger passing through, a hunting permit holder who had used the station as a waypoint, my own check-in entry, September 14, and, in October of 3 years prior, a single entry in neat block capital letters. Name, Tobias Fenn. Affiliation, Sound Design Research Group, University of Coastal Sciences. Purpose, acoustic field, study nocturnal. Duration, 2 weeks. Check-in signature, present. Check-out signature, absent. The check-out box was blank. I called Pat Gillespie the next morning. I asked whether there was a permit record for a Tobias Fenn, and she confirmed one existed. Access permit for Station 7, October 3rd through October 17th, 3 years ago. The permit had been processed as closed on the 17th, meaning someone in the administrative system had marked it resolved, but the logbook contained no departure signature. She said there was a notation in the station file. Visitor log reconciliation pending permit holder Fenn T. October visit. Dated November of that same year. Never resolved. I asked whether Fenn had been contacted directly, whether his institution had been notified, whether there had been any follow-up on the discrepancy. She said she did not know. She would look into it. I did not wait. I called the University of Coastal Sciences and was transferred to the Sound Design Research Program. A staff member there confirmed that Tobias Fenn had been a visiting researcher affiliated with the program for 1 academic year, the year in question. He had not returned for a second year. She could not share contact information, but said she would pass my details along if she had a way to reach him. I gave her my name, my university, and my email address. I have not heard from Tobias Fenn. I have thought about him extensively, about the shape of his experience here. He came to this station with equipment similar to mine, for a purpose similar to mine, and he detected something. I believe he must have detected it. Because the signal has apparently been active for decades, and his equipment, if it was comparable to mine, would have registered the same interference patterns, and he documented nothing that I have been able to find. And he left this station, if he left it, without signing the logbook. There is a gap in the record where his departure should be, a blank box in a column of signatures. Whatever happened to Tobias Fenn in the 2 weeks he spent at this station, it has left no accessible trace in any system I can reach. On the afternoon of September 24th, I made a decision. A methodological decision, not a brave one. I had a hypothesis about a physical object in a specific location in the forest. A solar-powered broadcast device of 1987 manufacture, still active, broadcasting on 162.475 MHz from a point 1.24 kilometers west-southwest of the station at bearing 247 degrees. The correct next step was to locate it and document it. I prepared the way I always prepare for a field excursion. Fully charged handheld recorder with backup unit. Compass set to 247 degrees magnetic. GPS unit with coordinates logged. Headlamp with spare battery pack. EMF meter for source localization, water, first aid kit, satellite phone with automatic check-in enabled. I went into the forest at 2 in the afternoon. Full daylight. I told no one, but I left a note on the desk describing my route and my expected return time of approximately 5 o'clock. The terrain descends gently from the station to the west, through a corridor of mature lodgepole pine before opening into a series of small clearings connected by deer trails. The underbrush was dry from the summer. Every footstep released the smell of sun-warmed resin and dust. I walked on compass bearing, checking the EMF meter every few minutes. For the first 600 meters, the readings were at baseline for a forested area with no infrastructure. At approximately the 800 meter mark, the needle shifted. The deviation was small but consistent, above background in the radio frequency range of the meter's detection capability. I adjusted my bearing slightly northward to follow the gradient and continued. The reading increased as the terrain leveled slightly and the trees became less dense. At one point, 1 kilometers by my GPS, I entered a clearing. The clearing was approximately 30 meters in diameter. The trees that would have grown through this space had been absent for long enough that the surrounding growth had established a defined perimeter. The edge between clearing and forest was clean and old. The ground was dry grass and low shrub, and around the clearing's edge, evenly spaced at intervals of approximately 5 meters, were survey markers, 12 of them. Standard Forest Service type, orange-painted metal stakes with reflective banding, at knee height, driven firmly into the soil. The paint was faded and chipped with age. They had been here for decades. They were still perfectly upright. At the center of the clearing, the EMF meter was at the high end of its scale. I knelt and looked at the ground. At the center of a slight soil mound, the kind of mound that forms over a buried object as the surrounding soil settles unevenly. Over years, a thin metal rod extended approximately 15 centimeters above the surface. An antenna, 8 millimeters in diameter, weathered to a dull gray. I set up my recorder. I positioned the microphone close to the antenna and ran a real-time enhancement filter, listening through my headphones as I recorded. What I heard was a loop. I listened to it for 42 minutes, rotating slowly around the antenna with the recorder in hand, moving the microphone to different positions and distances, building a 3-dimensional acoustic record of the signal. It was a long loop. I estimated 90 minutes of content cycling continuously. The content was the sounds of this clearing, of this forest, of this station, accumulated over what I was beginning to understand was nearly 4 decades of continuous recording. 37 years of the Whitmore Creek clearing's acoustic life, preserved in a loop and broadcast back into the environment that produced it. There was wind, in all its seasonal variations, the thin, dry wind of high summer and the heavier, moisture-laden wind of late autumn and the stillness of winter cold snaps. There was the creek below, fluctuating with snowmelt and drought cycles across decades of changing hydrology. There were birds, species sequences that shifted seasonally and across years. The acoustic record of population changes in the canyon's avian community, more complete than any survey I have ever seen in a research archive. There was rain and hail and, once, somewhere in the deep middle of the loop, what I believed was the sound of something very large moving through the clearing in darkness. A sound with a particular heavy quality to it that I could not immediately assign to any species I knew at this elevation. And there were human sounds. They were scattered through the loop like geological inclusions, brief, fragmentary, separated by long stretches of pure environment. The hollow knock of a boot on a wooden porch, distant enough that I knew it was coming from the station. Voices at a range too great for words, just the cadence and register of people in conversation. The mechanical sounds of equipment being operated, something with a motor, something metallic. The crack of a branch under a footstep in the understory between the clearing and the station. The sounds of all the people who had moved through this space and the station adjacent to it across the decades the device had been running, incorporated into the loop without their knowledge, archived alongside the forest sounds and broadcast back into the air. I was 40 minutes into the loop when I heard footsteps I recognized. The asymmetric cadence, my cadence. The slight favoring of my left foot that I have carried since a knee surgery 12 years ago, moving through dry brush at the pace I walk when I am doing a routine monitoring check. The sounds from the previous evening when I had walked the station perimeter at dusk. The device had recorded me, and it had incorporated that recording into the loop within 24 hours of the recording's occurrence. The loop was not a static archive. It was being actively updated. I finished the recording session. I photographed the survey markers, the mound, the antenna. I took EMF readings at 5-meter intervals across the clearing. Then I dug. At a depth of 30 centimeters, the blade of my camp trowel contacted the housing of the device. A sealed metal case approximately the size of a shoebox, military-grade construction, sealed with a rubber gasket that had partially degraded with age. On one face of the case, a solar panel array not original to the device. A modern panel, current technology, connected to the housing via a sealed cable port, a replacement, recently installed. The bracket mounting the replacement panel covered a portion of the case's data plate, but I could read the original stamped text. Whitmore Acoustic Survey Unit, ARB-1 installation date, the 4th of September 2087. Behind the mounting bracket, partially obscured but fully legible when I shifted the bracket aside, an adhesive label printed on a desktop printer, newer than everything else on the device by decades. 4 words and a date. Last service, March 14. No year, March 14. I photographed the data plate. I photographed the solar panel. Then I lifted the unit from the ground, approximately 4 kilograms, and carried it out of the earth. I did not turn it off. I did not know how. I brought it back to the station and placed it on the porch table and ran a full recording of its output for 2 hours. Then I packed it into an equipment case, called the regional office, and began the process of reporting what I had found. The investigators arrived 3 days later. 2 Forest Service law enforcement officers and a technical specialist in historical equipment. I gave them the device, the 1987 report, my field recordings, and a written summary of everything I had observed and documented. I signed a witness statement. They photographed the station, the crawl space, the clearing, the survey markers, the excavation site. They asked me questions for 3 hours. Then they told me I was free to continue my study or leave. There was no indication of ongoing danger, and my permit was still valid. I stayed. I finished the study. The data was good. The soundscape research I completed during those final 3 weeks was among the best fieldwork of my career, and the paper I produced from it has been well received. That is a fact worth stating, because I want the record to show that my judgment, my methodology, and my professional function remained intact throughout this experience. The closure report arrived by secure email in January, 4 months after I left the station. It confirmed the device as the original 1987 ARBU, Unit ARB-1. The modifications to its circuitry had been made by Barrett Tate, the contractor listed in the study as B. Tate, at the time of installation. Tate had altered the unit from a broadcast-only reference emitter into what the technical language of the report called an autonomous environmental acoustic recorder broadcaster, a device that continuously recorded its acoustic environment using a sensitive pressure transducer and incorporated those recordings into its broadcast loop, maintaining a finite memory archive that updated continuously, preserving the most recent input while compressing older material into the deep archive. The device was not designed to receive radio communication. It recorded sound in the acoustic frequency range and broadcast those recordings as a modulated signal on its assigned frequency of 162.475 MHz. The handwritten note the unit is still logging was, the report confirmed, accurate. It had always been accurate. Dr. N. Whitmore, the report noted in its background section, was the namesake of the Whitmore sector. He had disappeared in October 1989, 2 years after the study's conclusion, during a separate survey expedition in the district. His disappearance had been investigated, and the case closed as a probable accidental death in remote terrain, though no remains were ever recovered. The connection to the 1987 study and to Station 7 was noted in the original investigation file, which had been assigned the case number ARC1987WS044 and archived as a physical-only document. District Supervisor Calloway's 1992 radio blackout amendment, the report explained, had been issued in response to internal reports from station staff that nighttime radio communications were experiencing interference on 162.475 MHz, overlapping with weather radio frequencies and causing confusion during night shifts. Calloway had determined through internal consultation that the source of the interference could not be immediately identified, that it was localized to the nighttime hours, and that the most expedient solution was to suspend radio use during those hours rather than attempt to locate and resolve the source. No investigation into the source was formally opened. The amendment remained in the station's operations binder for 32 years. Barrett Tate's contracting license had lapsed in 1994 and had not been renewed. The investigators had not been able to locate a current address or contact information for him. There was no death record for Barrett Tate in any database they had access to. He was neither confirmed alive nor confirmed dead. The case status: resolved. I read the closure report in my office at the university. I read it twice, and then I sat for a while looking at the last page and the word resolved, and feeling the particular dissatisfaction of a researcher who knows that a dataset has been formally closed without being fully analyzed. There was something I had not included in my witness statement, something I had not reported to the investigators. Not because I was withholding it deliberately at the time I gave my statement. I had not yet fully processed what I had found. I had described the loop in general terms. I had described hearing my own footsteps in the loop. I had described the device's active recording capability. What I had not yet isolated, because it required the specific analytical framework I only fully developed after returning to my university lab and reviewing the recordings over subsequent weeks, was the final 43 seconds. My 2-hour recording of the device's output had captured a full loop cycle. The loop was 94 minutes in total length. At 93 minutes and 17 seconds, the last 43 seconds before the loop recycled, was the terminal segment, the most recently recorded material added to the archive. The first component of this terminal segment was 3 seconds of complete acoustic silence, not the quiet of a calm night actual silence, the kind that appears on a spectrogram as a clean blank, the kind that occurs in a natural environment when something large and present causes all other sound to momentarily cease. The second component was 14 seconds of my footsteps, my cadence, my weight, my movement through dry brush at the station's perimeter, recorded the previous evening. The third component was 2 seconds of silence. The fourth component was 23 seconds of footsteps that were not mine. A different cadence, a different weight distribution, a different interaction with the ground surface, heavier, more deliberate, the footstep pattern of someone moving with purpose and familiarity through terrain they knew well, moving in a direction away from the clearing, away from the station, into the deeper forest, unhurried, diminishing with distance over the 23 seconds, growing quieter as the source moved beyond the device's effective recording range, and then becoming inaudible. And then the loop recycled. I have reviewed this segment approximately 80 times. I have run every analytical procedure available to me and to the 2 colleagues I consulted. The footsteps in the terminal segment are real. They are not artifacts of loop compression, signal layering, or recording distortion. They are a genuine acoustic event captured by the device on the evening of September 22nd, in the minutes after my own perimeter walk, and before I retrieved the device the following day. I was inside the station during those minutes. My satellite phone's GPS log is unambiguous on this point. The investigators reviewed my GPS record as part of my witness statement and confirmed it. No one else was documented as being at the station during my permit period. Dwight Rowe's caretaker visit was not scheduled until the following week, and he confirmed to the investigators that he had made no unscheduled visits during my stay. The investigators themselves arrived 3 days later. There is no permit, no visitor log entry, no administrative record of any person present at Station 7 on the night of September 22nd beyond myself. The device recorded someone walking away from the clearing in the forest after dark on September 22nd. That person was not me. That person is not documented anywhere in any system I have access to. I submitted a follow-up inquiry to the Forest Service in February, asking specifically about 2 items: the identity of whoever had serviced the device in March, and the status of any investigation into the unidentified footsteps captured in the terminal segment of the loop recording. The inquiry was received and acknowledged. It is listed in the regional office's case management system as pending review. It has been pending for 3 months. I still have copies of all my field recordings. They are backed up in 3 separate locations: my university workstation, a personal external drive I keep at home, and a secure cloud storage account. I keep them because they are evidence in an open inquiry. I keep them because the pending review is pending. I keep them because the 43-second terminal segment is data, and data is not closed because a case is marked resolved. I also keep them because of the last 3 seconds. The footsteps diminish over 23 seconds into the forest and become inaudible. The loop does not immediately recycle. There are 3 seconds of near silence between the end of the audible footsteps and the beginning of the next loop cycle. 3 seconds that I did not notice in my initial reviews because they fall at the edge of attention in real-time listening. 3 seconds that only revealed their content when I ran the segment at half speed with the subaudible channel amplified to its maximum sensitivity. In those 3 seconds, at a distance consistent with the far edge of the device's recording range, in the darkness at the boundary of the clearing and the deep forest, the sound of someone breathing. Slow, regular, controlled. The breathing of a person who has stopped moving and is standing still. A person who is not alarmed. A person who is simply present. And then the loop begins again from the beginning, and the first sound on the loop is wind in the trees, in a year I cannot determine. Somewhere in the long middle of the 37 years the device was running, and everything that came before and after is compressed into the archive, layered and preserved, cycling continuously through the speakers of a device that was supposed to be removed in October of 1987 and wasn't, broadcasting into the forest and back toward the station on a frequency just close enough to weather radio to be detected by the right equipment, at the right distance, by the right person with the right training. The clearing has been cleared. The survey markers have been removed. The disturbed soil has been logged in the site remediation record and photographed for the archive. The frequency, 162.475 MHz, no longer broadcasts from a 4 kilometers west-southwest of Whitmore Sector Station 7, at bearing 247 degrees magnetic. I know this because the investigators conducted a frequency sweep during their site visit and found no active signal. I know this because the device is in a climate-controlled storage room in the Regional Forest Service archive facility, sealed in an evidence container, pending the archival electronics team's review of the recordings in its memory. The archival electronics team's review is expected to begin within the next 8 to 12 months. I submitted a formal research access request to review the recordings myself in my professional capacity as an acoustic ecologist with direct evidential knowledge of the case in December. The request was acknowledged. It is pending review. I have not heard from Tobias Fenn. I have not heard from anyone at the University of Coastal Sciences regarding my contact information. Barrett Tate is unconfirmed alive. Doctor. Whitmore's remains were never found. The amendment is still in the binder on the shelf in the station, because the station is still standing, maintained under its care agreement, and the binder was not removed as evidence because it predates the incident and is considered background documentation. Every month, Dwight Rao drives up the access road from Route 9, opens the station with his key, sweeps the floor and checks the water tank and inspects the structure, logs his visit in the logbook, and drives back down. The binder sits on the shelf. The amendment is on page 41. ARC 1987WS044, still listed in the regional database as a physical-only file, now appended with a cross-reference to the device case. Resolved. The forest at 7,400 feet does not know it has been resolved. The canyon continues to produce its soundscape, whether or not anyone is there to record it. The wind crosses the clearing where the survey markers used to stand, and the grass moves. And the soil that was disturbed by the excavation continues to settle and compact around the space where the device was. And the sound of that settling, the faint compression of earth around an absence, goes unrecorded now, unbroadcast, unarchived. Unless something else is listening. I do not say that to be dramatic. I say it because it is the precise question that the evidence leaves open. The question that no formal closure report has answered. The question that sits in the 3 seconds of silence at the end of my recording with the weight of something that has been patient for a very long time and has learned, across 37 years of continuous operation, that the correct approach to an environment is not to announce yourself, but to simply record it, to incorporate it, to make it part of the loop. My name is Dr. Selah Marsh. My inquiry is pending.